type of permit is issued to them, yes, correct.
Councilman Hughes.
Well, Mr. Mayor, what I would kind of be in favor of is asking the city attorney to draft a proposed ordinance that would be just as broad as it could be under the state statute, so that we could have the full latitude that the statutes would allow. And just, have him draft that, because I'm really kind of all in favor of making these things just as broad and all encompassing as the statutes allow us to.
Well, and it'd be pretty broad because in our conversations the other day, some of these laws, they pretty much took all restrictions out of it and put it back onto the city to, like location, for instance. Location could be an address, and the example they gave was a 3-story building. You could do 36 permits on the main floor, 36 on the second floor, 36 on the third. And I think even under a retail liquor license, if you had 3 stories to it, you could have 3 separate bars under one retail liquor license. So it's pretty much open to what this council decides the rules would be. Councilman Hopkins.
Yeah, I kind of agree. If we draft something, and then we can always trim back from there, but I think we need some language to work with. The reason I'm concerned a little bit about it is we had the issue with Pottery by You. They are doing wine, and they just pretty much told us, from what we understand, what the state said, that as long as it's within that building, they can do it. And they can pass it back and forth between the walls.
Artisan
So,
Alley? Yeah. Sorry, just for the record, it's Artisan Alley.
Artisan Alley, yeah. Yeah. And then the other one, I recall about probably 3 or 4 years ago, we had the ex-dollar store. It wasn't a dollar store, but it was like that. And it was just guys would come in and say, well, I'll get the license this week. And it was a problem for us. And I think, I don't know if you were here, Chief, or not, but it was a problem for us because there was trouble every week there.
Well, to follow up on that, if I may, Mr. Mayor, and that's the other piece I think we need to talk about is what are the unintended consequences that we may experience if we loosen this up without thinking these things through, because if we did ever achieve what I would like to see, which is simply at a state level not capping anymore, letting the market control this, we would be devaluing the existing licenses, and this essentially would be a takings from the current license holders. And if there is essentially unlimited ability to serve, then we could be having that impact as well, which was the problem, one of the problems with the dollar store place, whatever it was called.
Whatever it was.
Is they were basically operating like they were a permanent venue by using these temporary permits.
That's what they called it, the venue.
It was the venue, that's right, and they were just having different employees go in, so they never got the cap. But the people who had licenses obviously had a legitimate complaint about that these guys were operating like they had a license, but they didn't have a license. So I guess those are the things we have to balance.
But I concur with what Councilman said regarding let's draft it up and go from there. Does that make sense?
I'd be all in favor of being in line with the changes that the legislature put in as far as the special malt beverage permit, because the David Street Station has had a very difficult time running in the black, and whether we like it or not, beer sales is one of the ways you can make money at an event, and if they always have to give that to a caterer, or they can't serve beer because they've run up to the cap, then we're basically handicapping it.
All right, Councilman Pell, did you have another topic then that you want to take these one at a time?
Well, I just thought we should all talk about each one as we go through. The floor went through all of them in sequence, so I don't know. What was the first one? Was the special? Was the location?
Yes, it was the cap, Your Honor. It was the cap on location. So only 24 per location for just the malt beverage, not the special malt beverage permit. So different. The special is the yearly one that you're talking about with David Street.
I don't have an issue with that.
I think the only other thing we had on there was the very last thing we were talking about, as far as deadlines, essentially. And we had, I don't know how many, I'm gonna defer to you, how many did?
Your Honor, we had 9.
So 9 people came in late beyond the deadline. We talked about this last time, is it doesn't make sense to have a deadline if we're not gonna make people stay. So, and I guess take it a step further, we had one more this week that just came in and said, oh, hey, we've decided we want to renew our license too. Well, we're way past the time to meet our statutory record, what's required of us to do. There's no way we get it done in time. So they're gonna need to just go back through and reapply for a license and come back in, and go through that process again. But one thing we talked about was putting something in place that, and I'd go as far as saying, if you have a deadline, you don't reach that deadline, the next day, I guess whoever's in line for that license is in line, you better hope you're the first one there. So, but I know that we're doing some more research on what can be done, and,
Yep.
and you plan on bringing that forward to us.
Mr. Mayor,
Councilman Hughes.
when do those licenses expire?
Your Honor, it's March 31st.
Okay, so their license is not expired until then, so that's a really hard deadline. Other deadlines are kind of soft deadlines, but that's a,
Well, Mr. Mayor, Councilman, the problem that we run into is statutes require a certain amount of publication and notice it be done in a certain amount of time ahead of the time period that you actually formally consider the renewals. And so where we can't meet those statutory obligations, we have to set what we consider hard deadlines in order for us to have the adequate time to get those in the paper and get the preparation made and everything else.
Not to butt in, but I'm gonna butt in, because what I'm worrying about is that if someone was so tardy in getting their application in, that all of those steps can't be done
Right.
in time, maybe we have no choice but to tell them your license expires March 31st. You're going to have to close until it goes through the renewal process. I kind of worry, I know that sounds a little bit draconian, but I'm not real sure if we have much choice in that. Because how do we,
Now, the question becomes, if they're selling liquor after they missed the deadline to get it in the newspaper in time, and they sell liquor after that, after March 31, who's hanging out there?
I mean, if,
They are.
I guess to clarify, what is the deadline date for applications for liquor license?
So to turn in the renewal applications to us, I think it was December 3rd this year. So we set it out to allow us time to gather all the information, to go through their applications, get the other documentation they need to provide. Then it has to go to the state. From there, there's other rules. So the statute says, as Carter was alluding to, it has to be 30 days before the end of the time when we have the public hearing. So working backwards, if the 31st is the deadline, that's why you're having the public hearing on February 18th, because that's the last meeting we can have. If there was a meeting on March 1st, which is a Sunday, we could do that, but obviously that doesn't work with our timeline, so it becomes February 18th. So then going backwards from that, we have to do 2 publications before that also. So it just kind of works backwards is how we work it.
yeah, but I just worry if, okay, your license expires on the 31st. It expires on the 31st. How do we get around that, or how do they get around that, or something? I'm not meaning to be draconian and beat someone over the head with this, but we might not have any choice in the matter.
Who sell them without a license?
Yeah.
Their option would be
Literally.
to apply for a new license.
Yeah.
So
like the one that just came in this last week, the option to them at this point in time is go apply for a new license. And the one you have now is gonna expire, but if you get on it now, that we could possibly get through that process, so there is no lapse in time. But that's the problem they created. They had a deadline of the 3rd of December, they just elected not to do anything until now.
I kind of agree with what Councilman Huber said about being draconian, but by the same token, these people that came in now, we shouldn't try to rush the process and have special meetings at work sessions to get 3 readings in and everything. The lack of planning on their part does not constitute an emergency on our part.
That's,
And so I think that we need to stick with and go through the process along. And if they lose their license for a month or 2, well, maybe maybe they'll go to their proctologist and find their head.
Anyone in the world that knows me knows that I'm the world's greatest putter-offer, so to hear me talking about this.
well, and I think that's where we come back to, that's the discussion we're having, is that if our deadline is December 3rd, then December 4th, your license will be open for somebody, you still have it, but it'll be open for somebody else to apply for. So if you're not there to apply for it, and somebody else gets it, should have planned ahead. So, not saying that's the way it's going, but.
Yeah, but the more
it's-
immediate problem though is these people that are gonna expire on the 31st of March and don't have the process rolling along. What do we do with them?
We've
Because that's
all
an
rescued
immediate
them, is
problem.
what we've done.
Well,
We have, yeah.
that's,
Done what?
Yeah.
rescue them.
We've done exactly what I said we shouldn't do. Basically, we could be having a special meeting we could have had a reading last Tuesday, we can have another reading tonight, we can have another reading next week, so in essence, you get 3 readings in 3 weeks instead of 6 weeks.
We'd also have to address the business day issue.
Sure.
Yeah. But I mean, that's what we have done in the past.
And I would just reiterate, the poor planning on their behalf doesn't constitute us having to jump through hoops to make it happen for them. If you can't plan on time, and you're gonna shut your business down for a couple weeks because of the fact that you didn't get it done, you can't blame us for that.
Exactly right.
So,
So, Mr. Mayor, members of the council, if it's okay with you, we'll get to work on a proposal as it relates to dealing with that issue. We feel like the direction that you've given us so far as it relates to that issue is to have those folks come in and visit with you the night that you're considering renewals and go from there. But otherwise, we'll come back to you with a proposal.
Mr. Mayor, if I could just, a specific question, I think this was kind of kicked into gear by the situation involving Mr. Huff and his application for a bar and grill license. And so there was discussion of the limitations that someone like him would have, where they have a second location that they would like to cater, but they have the numbers capped. So are we giving sufficient relief with this proposal so that someone in a similar circumstance would need to have 2 separate licenses? Do we know that?
enough relief in that situation itself. Again,
Well,
I think.
or a similar situation.
But again, I think that comes back to our definition of what location is, and how the division of a piece of property, how we decide that we want to divide a property. So I guess if you look at his situation in particular, he's got an open hall. So there could be 36 permits for that open hall, but if he wanted to do just a half hall, well, then you could have front half and back half, which gives you 36 on each side more. So technically, you could have over 100 catering permits if you wanted to, if that's the road that we went down.
Yeah. Basically, he could have an A, a B, and then the combined
Yeah,
for a C.
A, a B,
so-
and a
Yeah.
full would be C. Just depends. So
Mr. Mayor, Councilman, I would say the short answer is yes. I think you would get substantial relief. I think so.
Wayfinding.
Please.
Okay, so we have to make a little change here, and we need to move on to wayfinding next, because we have a couple people that need to.
Just wanted to keep us in the audience, it's fine.
All right, move on to wayfinding.
Thank you, sir, and thank you, members of the council, for that indulgence. We're at the point where we need to get some direction from you as it relates to moving a formal approval process to the floor. And so we do have some of our consultants here this evening to talk to us about the wayfinding program and where we're at and what we would like to suggest by way of implementation and outcomes and so on. So with that, I'd be pleased to turn it over to Ms. Becker and RDG.
Members of council, honorable mayor, 2 weeks ago, staff provided to you, along with the city manager, an update on your council goals. Just over a year ago, you had set the council goals, and one of them was marketing. The city of Casper will exceptionally market itself as a great community to locate a business and to live by doing the following. The first objective was to communicate community amenities with a wayfinding plan. And staff was tasked with implementing a wayfinding project, first of all getting a plan done, but then implementing a wayfinding project no later than fiscal year 2021. So well into last year, staff got together, and again, that was your community department, community development department, our parks department, and infrastructure committee, and looked at a way to create a wayfinding plan. We have funded it through the Metropolitan Planning Organization, and as such, we have made it truly a community wayfinding plan and brought in our partners with Natrona County, Town of Mills, Town of Evansville, Town of Barnum. The wayfinding plan project was kicked off in September with the public meetings throughout this area. And then in October, if you all remember, you were invited out into the atrium area for some updates on some of the graphics and some of the design of what would artistically represent each of the entities. We did a lot of public participation. We have had numerous community meetings, again, with our partners. This week, Monday and Tuesday, we are hosting 9 meetings. This is the 9th. And we have met with the municipalities. We have met with the Department of Transportation. We have also met with our steering committee, which is composed of agencies around Casper that will utilize wayfinding, whether it's the Downtown Development Authority, whether it's tourism, whether it's historic preservation. Our citizens committee with the NPO, we've got 2 representatives here who've looked and also been a part of our steering committee. We've had our trails system as part of that too, that steering committee. We've also had a meeting with our technical committee, which are the representatives from the entities who are pretty much the engineers of the group that are looking at the construction of these signs and the costing that goes along with that, but just the maintenance that it's going to take to actually create signs that are going to, as you'll hear from Ryan, be about 5 by 6 feet, so they're very large. So we're looking at how we can do some of that perhaps in-house. I think, what are my other groups? Those are the biggies. We had an internal meeting also within the city of Casper to look at how to roll this out within our parks department as well as through our public services department and then also within the community development department. So this is the 9th. Again, the project plan is funded. What we're asking tonight after you hear the update is some direction, because now we need to look at the cost and how we're going to begin to fund this project. We are in budget cycle right now, so we want to just get some of that planted as we've done with the other municipalities and the county and share some of the cost and some of the further research. So we contracted again with RDG. Ryan Peterson's going to step in and give the update truly on how we've brought together artwork, destinations, and locations with this wayfinding plan, and again to make it truly community-wide. So Ryan?
Thank you, Liz, and thank you, Liz, and Renee, and Pam, and Jeremy for your hospitality, and Kenny Okibo, who's over here with our firm, has been instrumental in helping us get to where we're at today. And so, Mayor and Council and staff, thank you for this opportunity. I'll try to step out of the way here. Quick agenda, so Liz has already kind of set the stage in terms of the background, and so we don't need to spend a lot of time there. We'll jump into some of the updates, and we'll share a draft of the master plan. We have printed versions that we've been receiving comment on, and we'll be making some edits, and then we anticipate sharing a draft of that here in the next week or so. We'll talk a little bit about implementation and policy that comes with that and some of the next steps and costs, so we'll walk through that now. Many of you probably remember, and Liz already gave a recap of where we've been, so we won't spend a lot of time there. We're right down here in workshop 3, which is the bottom bullet. And we'll be talking, as Liz mentioned, we've had a number of meetings and they've gone very well, I think, and it's been great to see the communities who have been engaged, who have provided feedback on all of the graphics, provide us the confirmation that we were looking for, that we've gone in the right direction. So, quick recap about some of the artwork and why we are where we're at, along with the destinations. The public input part of this project really helped us identify what those high priorities were. This is a snapshot from our public input session at David Street Station. Overwhelmingly, what we heard is from people who live here, and those that are coming here, they want to know where downtown is. They want to know where the mountain is. They want to know how they can get to David Street Station. They want to find their way to Mills or Evansville or Bar None. And so all of those things came out through that process. We worked with the steering committee to assemble a spreadsheet of over 300 destinations, and then we went through and prioritized those on a 1 being a very high priority and a 5 being a lower priority. Working through the steering committee with them, we ultimately thought that was in the best interest of the community to keep those top tier, the 1 through 3 destinations. And for an example, a 1 destination, when we did this, there's a little bit of subjectivity to try to make it objective, but a 1 would be Casper Mountain. Everybody's looking to get there, people that live here and people that you're bringing here. A 2 might be something like a high school. A 3 is something that is maybe a regional park. 4 and 5, typically we're not sending people there very often, and they may not need to necessarily know where it's at, or it's for people that live here and they know every which way to get there. So you don't necessarily need a sign to direct people that go there every day to the post office. And so we work through all of that. The graphics here that you see represent the values that the public weighed in on. Key things about that were the natural resources were very prevalent. People feel a strong connection to the environment, to water, to the mountains, and also to your history. And you can see how that scored out here. Just the orange bars have already kind of stated that. Our second workshop, which many of you participated in, we gave a preview of, we had an open house right out here, and we had a number of boards on display. And working with the DOT, we've landed on what's called a Series D font. Why that's important is all of the signs that are placed within the public right-of-way are governed by the Manual on Uniform Traffic Control. And so as part of the recommendations, anything that goes into public right-of-way, so that would need to follow those guidelines. And so secondly, the public weighed in on the shape. Ultimately, C was the chosen option. The public was split, but when we think about the connection to the landscape and to the parks and to the natural environment, it seemed to be a good fit. And then the color scheme here on the right side, those colors, those earth tones were driven by the connection to nature and to the landscape. Here's some examples of what we had up on display. Those in blue, people really responded well to the blue graphic, the blue color with the white font, providing great contrast, and ultimately the shape on the far right. This is a diagram that shows the feedback and how it was relatively balanced. You might remember some of these early graphics, and we really appreciate all of the feedback that the community has provided to make sure that these marks hit the mark, maybe? But we wanted to make sure that this is a 20 to 25 year project, and or it should last that long. And so these will be on those signs, and so we want to make sure that you're proud of what you look at when you come in to work every day, or you travel to the mountain or out to Alcova. We also asked the public to weigh in on the materiality, and ultimately what we boiled it down to is that when we look at creating monuments or gateways within the community, each community is unique in its own way and should have the ability to celebrate that uniqueness. But we also want them to tie together with some common themes. And so unified fonts, so the typography that goes on the signs, the use of timbers, and then also Core 10 steel, kind of a nod to your past in terms of industry. These were some of the early examples that we've shared, and ultimately you'll see the final marks here right now. So where we've been since the last open house is we've made a number of updates to those marks. We've had great conversation here and provided some feedback, so you'll see some subtle changes to what you're about to see after this discussion. Advance the master plan, ultimately the report that we would be seeking adoption for here coming up. And the project itself, we're looking to be substantially complete in about 30 days or so, 30 to 45 days, and then would be seeking adoption through the various jurisdictions. So here is where we're at with the final graphics, and so I'll just kind of quickly zoom in here so we can all see. So in the upper left corner, this is the proposed mark for Evansville. In the upper right is the proposed graphic for Casper. Bar none with the antelope. What we're now, originally we were discussing it under the premise of Alcoba, but recognizing that there's more than just Lake Alcoba, there's the waters, the rivers that are out there. We are now, I believe, calling it the, what was the name? The
Waterways.
Waterways, there we go, thank you, Kenny. The waterways area as people go out of town. And then the bottom two graphics, the eagle for Mills, and then the mountain, which would be for the county. So those are the graphics of where we're at. We have a few subtle tweaks, but nothing substantial that we'll be making. And then this is an example of the sign family in terms of how they would be applied. So there's two types of signs that make up the primary wayfinding system. The standard size, which uses 4-inch letter heights, and then a large size, which uses 6-inch letter heights. When you're entering a district, such as downtown or the over by the East Ridge Mall would be two examples, an area that is kind of known as a destination. You would have a marker on the bottom of the sign that would identify where you're at. This is an example of what all of the signs look like, a mock-up of them all together. And we can come back to any of this. I wanted to get through it in case you have questions. We are still working through a number of revisions, so this is very preliminary in terms of monuments and gateways, but we're looking again to create that common theme amongst all of them. The use of stone, having a common connection, got it? Having a common connection between all of them. And so you can see the use of timber, the use of the font, the city's logo, and making some subtle changes to the one that's on Interstate 25. The last sign type that we're looking at is interpretive, and if I didn't articulate this at the beginning, there's 4 primary signs: directional, which is the primary focus, monuments and gateways, identification, which is the aha, we've arrived, or you know when you've been there, it's giving you confirmation, and then interpretive. We're providing guidelines for how you would lay out content, the height for ADA compliance, legibility, the materiality so it lasts a long time, things like that. This sign that is shown in the bottom is what the steering committee has provided feedback, suggesting that's the direction they'd like to go. Again, following through using the look from that's similar to the national parks, but yet distinct to Casper region. The master plan, which we can go through here if you have questions about, where right now it's about a 100-page document that'll give you a summary of the entire process, along with the prioritization. And then for each sign that of the 200 to 210 or so that are proposed for the region, there's a proof that tells you what goes on it, what it should look like. So when we move forward into implementation, if you self-perform, which I think right now is the direction we're looking at, is to have the city of Casper work with the various jurisdictions to facilitate this and to share those costs amongst the various jurisdictions. So there's a coordinated and unified effort. The wayfinding itself should work together as a system. So what happens in Mills impacts the people's experience as they make their way towards Casper, or as you go to the mountain and you come downtown. And so it's a system. If you take one sign out here, it could have ramifications elsewhere. And so we wanted to think across the jurisdictional boundaries in a collaborative effort. Policy and implementation. So some of the things that we'd like to see as you go about implementing this. Right now, of the there's about 200 to 210 signs that we're looking at. And depending on, after we work with staff, we're estimated to be in that $1.5 to $2 million range, depending on the level of installation that's done in-house versus what's contracted out of house. As you go about doing that, we would want to, number one, and the DOT is agreeable to being a partner with this. We've met with them and they've been very accommodating to our requests and asks and partnership, but would remove all of the existing directional signs that have been placed on mast arms, on poles, on the sides of building, the old wayfinding signs, to ultimately, in theory, we'd remove 4 signs for every one we put up. Now that's more of a guesstimate, but that would be a likely scenario as we've experienced driving throughout the community. Secondly, as you move forward, we would want to work with, whether it's the MPO or the cities, to have a committee that would allow, if somebody was to petition, a destination to go on the sign, so we don't have sign clutter kind of re-emerge. So those signs that are placed in the public right-of-way should comply with the manual and uniform traffic control. That is the regulating body that oversees all signage throughout the state of Wyoming and throughout the nation. Third, as we think about adding destinations in the future, we'd want to make sure that they are a high priority and they serve the needs of the greater public. We don't necessarily need to direct everyone to a neighborhood park, to an elementary school, to the local fire department. Those are all things you go to every day and are not necessarily the target audience. Or the target destinations in terms of where your key people are looking to go. And then make sure that you update this on a routine basis. That could be on a every 5 to 10 year time frame, and then the master plan as well, looking at a 10-year update, making sure you keep it current. Going back to the implementation process, we've had many conversations about, should we focus on doing the loop roads, or should we look at just downtown, or maybe we go jurisdiction by jurisdiction. We don't have that figured out yet. But what we do suggest is make sure that it is a coordinated effort between all of the jurisdictions, and as we further refine these costs, which we'll come back to you with, we want it, that certainly impacts the ability to implement. And so once we get that fine-tuned, we'd be able to give you more specifics on what those likely phases might look like. But ultimately, if nothing else, if you can do it all at once, you have the ability to find funding through grant sources, and you have match dollars through partners. That gives you leverage. Once you move forward and you put parts of it up, the excitement, the energy behind it, it becomes much more difficult to put something up now and then 2 years come back later and find funding. It becomes more difficult each year that goes on to find funding. And that's based on our experience in other communities. And so if you can, try to move forward with a phase that is substantial, that'll also help you from an economies of scale. Each of these signs requires, well, most of them would require some level of traffic control while the contractor is out in the field. And so all of those components add up. There's a cost to that. And so the more efficient you can be, the better off you'll be from a costing and an overall user experience standpoint. So with that, next steps, we're taking all the feedback from all of these meetings, and we'll be working over the next 30 days to make changes to the plan, update the costs, and then ultimately would be bringing it back to you for adoption. And so Liz or Kenny, if there's anything else to add, I think that's where we're at, but we look forward to your questions if you have them.
Councilman Bates.
You mentioned taking signs down and replaced them, and you said you'd be putting up about 200 signs?
Correct.
Is that 200 signs within Casper, or is that 200 signs including everybody?
About 200 to 210 across the region. So Casper is probably 3/4 of that. Yeah, so that would be what we're looking at.
Councilman Huber.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm thinking about like the signs that show a skier or a snowmobile symbol, those kind of things that are currently out there pointing to the mountain or whatever. Would those be taken out and replaced by some of these, or are they going to stay there and be supplemented by these? Or? Because those are pretty uniform all over, certainly all over the state.
They are, and I don't have a yes or no answer for you on that. I think it's going to depend on the circumstances. We have been having discussions with the county, and Brooke, feel free to jump in here at any moment. But looking at a coordinated effort, and certainly once you move a little bit closer to the mountain or you're within parks, the symbology becomes much more important, those icons. It allows you to communicate more in less space. What we're showing here is based on all of the prioritization across the county, and so sometimes those areas where there's camping or snowmobile or trails don't always show up on every sign, but we're going to look at that in terms of what might be an opportunity to put on these signs should the opportunity arise.
I think your signs look really cool and everything, but I'm just thinking, some of those are just uniformly used symbols, and that people at a glance can tell what they mean.
Yeah, absolutely. The National Park Service has developed those icons that are to be uniformly used on those cultural signs, which are the brown ones that you see, whether it's on the freeway or on a roadway.
Any other questions?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So did I hear you correctly then that indeed strategies with respect to implementation and so forth are a part of your scope?
Identifying the costs and an implementation timeline, along with a map that would show the likely phases, and that would be based on the steering committees and the technical committee's feedback.
Okay.
But yes.
Great follow-up. What type of time frame do you typically see for a community of our stature, if you will?
It usually there's about a 2-year process would be a reasonable process from when you start the implementation to when you finish. But then it doesn't really end, because as roads come online or things go, it continues to move on. But I think reasonably, maybe it'd be nice to be sooner than that, but 2 years would be a reasonable time frame.
Councilman Hopkins.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. With that in mind, with the time frame in mind, I know we have certain sign capabilities, and we do a lot of that in-house. And we're gonna have an inventory of signs that probably will go to the scrap metal pile. Do you think we'd have a reasonable chance of using our people to do a significant number of those, and maybe we can contract out to the other communities?
Mr. Mayor, Councilman, I really appreciate that question. Having been through something like this before, what helped us was to be able to have the blanks on hand, as well as the decaling sort of patterns and so on hand, so that as things did develop over time, or repairs and replacements need to be made, generally speaking, my experience would be that we do all of that ourselves, and keep up with that expansion as needed. My concern certainly is that initial sort of capital outlay necessary to make all these things come online in an appropriate time frame and in a manner that helps the public well.
Thank you.
No other questions?
Your Honor, I wanted to make one additional comment for council. Jeremy Yates was promoted to our MPO supervisor, and I'm sure that was announced by Carter, but he's gotten in over the last week into all this, as well as multiple projects that we've had with the MPOs, including the LRTP from last week. So I just wanted to acknowledge Jeremy in tonight's meeting too.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Do you want thumbs?
Mr. Mayor, Council, if Council's comfortable with what you've heard, even from a conceptual standpoint, we plan to bring this forward to a formal adoption process, and if you're good with that, then the thumb to put us in that direction would be great.
We'll still have an opportunity to talk about cost. And where
Absolutely.
that's coming from, so.
Absolutely, you betcha. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so we'll go back to the health department update.
Mr. Mayor, if I could real quick, as you all know, or probably found in your packets, we are being requested to consider a partnership as it relates to replacing a generator over at the community health center. it sounds like the exposure that the city would have if council sees fit would be in the neighborhood of $22,000. And Ms. Kinder has kindly agreed to come walk us through this as in the company of our commissioner as well. And so if I could defer to them, that'd be great.
Great, thank you very much, Mayor, City Council, and Mr. City Manager, and thank you, Commissioner Kaufman, for your support in this. Yes, I am here to talk to you in regards to the generator. I'm going to walk you through a couple of programs that really are dependent on having the generator that will supply what we need for the building. We have one in existence and have had significant problems since this summer. We have lost power on a number of occasions. There's no, it's completely unknown why, if it has to do anything with the construction, power poles, all of those kinds of things. But as a result, we have had to replace one of our freezers because of the surge and all of those kinds of things. The freezer has gone down, we have replaced that. We have 2 refrigerators that we'll be replacing as we get closer to the end of the year. And we have on hand at all times $160,000 worth of inventory in vaccines. So we're trying to look for ways to ensure that nothing happens to that investment. We also have to have the ability to put any kind of vaccines that we would have in the event of an emergency. So if something should happen, as you might imagine, there's some things in the news right now that people are watching. So if we were to have a shipment, we would have to be able to put that in a secure location. We do have contracts with other locations, but being able to really have what we need to. This is our newest freezer. It's able to go below 30 degrees, minus 30, in order to keep some of our vaccines where they need to be. That's not an easy task, if you will. And then these are the 2 refrigerators that we have as well in the building. Currently, the generator is not able to carry the load of all things, even when we reduce to a very minimal of what we need to have. We, turn off the lights, turn off computers of all non-essential devices. It still is not able to upkeep the building. This is just a listing of all the vaccines that we have available, so you can see we keep quite a few of those. Some are required that we have on hand due to requirements for a student to attend school. We do have back-to-school clinics and we have exclusion days, so if required vaccines are not in place, we have to provide some of these. You can see hepatitis A and hepatitis B as options that we have, recognizing that we have had a recent hepatitis A outbreak, so having that on hand at all times. HPV is actually a vaccine that we have that can prevent cancer, and it's actually becoming one of our higher used vaccines that we use in the clinic. And then obviously flu, everyone talks about it, it's in the news all the time. I'm so excited to say that for the first time in my 12 years of being at the health department, we've actually run out of flu vaccine, which has never happened. Usually we're trying to figure out ways to offload it, get it to different people and not let it go to waste, but we've actually been able to provide, and I can tell you the amount of doses here momentarily. We do a lot of tetanus shots, whooping cough, which was recently in the news here in town, especially when someone has a person who comes into the family that's pregnant. So we obviously provide vaccine for surrounding family members, so that's a critical vaccine that we have on hand. And then we also do a lot of hepatitis shots, particularly for when it impacts the city, for plumbers and people who are in waterworks. So we do provide some of that. So what makes us unique? I think that's a question that I get asked a lot, looking at, very sensitive little device here. What makes us different than any other healthcare provider? We actually are keeping track of everything that affects the public's health. So we are under strategic planning that we're working on, and that's one of the things that we've identified is that we are responsible for the public's health. It's not just about, our clients that come to us, we're responsible for Natrona County. So we participate weekly in calls with the state where we get information that talks about salmonella that we have in our community, all of the STDs, we participate in that every single week just to kind of see what's going on in the trends. We make sure that we're following up on all of the different diseases. If there needs to be follow up, if there needs to be any quarantine, additional medications, all of those kinds of areas. But we work with the state very closely. We look for trends, so if we start to see an increase in the number of cases, for example, pertussis is very sensitive. We can be notified that we have a pertussis case and it can quickly evolve into a number of cases, or it can be dispelled as it's nothing that we need to be concerned about. But we're always watching those trends. We also collect the data, so we're looking at things over time. We see if there's an increase of something from one year to the next, different months, all of those kinds of things. So we're always collecting that data and looking at it. We also need to be prepared to provide mass vaccination if we need to. So, for example, if an event occurred that required us to vaccinate the entire county, we would have 72 hours from the time that we contacted the state, who would then contact CDC. The national stockpile would be accessed, the medications or whatever we needed would be sent to Wyoming. Basically what we've calculated by doing a lot of exercises is it will be, we started out with 72 hours. By the time it gets to Casper, we're down to 48 hours that we have to prophylax or do vaccination for the entire Trona County. So with less than 40 employees, that gets a little bit tricky and we have a lot of relationships. And so we always try to keep as much as possible on hand, needles, etc. But whatever vaccine may or may not be in hand, but we want to be able to secure the ones that we do have. We provided 4,399 vaccines over the last year. As I said, most of those were flu. We actually do more adult vaccinations than we do pediatric. We also provide reduced cost vaccination to the uninsured, so we have a program that allows us to provide vaccination to all individuals. So, the next slide that I have is the generator is required for the building. So we serve, or we want to be able to secure the vaccines at all times within the building. We also are the backup emergency operations center to the sheriff and to police. Our focus is obviously on the health, but we're always looking to provide backup. The current generator, as I said before, is not able to sustain the building even with non-essential equipment. Thank you. So the state public health nursing actually did a return on investment to look at how important it is for public health nursing to provide this service. And it's a document this thick, and there's a whole bunch of really detailed slides that I spare you but I can provide should you require it. But basically what they found is that for all of the different costs, for every 6 return of investment of public health nursing providing immunization services in the state was estimated at $6.32 per $1 spent. So we try to ensure that we're a valuable resource in the community. We think that in Casper we're actually higher due to the fact of the number of vaccinations. We are in the lead according to the state numbers. Obviously we kind of toss back and forth between Cheyenne or us who does the most. So in the news you hear a lot about coronavirus, right? It's a constantly changing, ever evolving situation. At this time there is no one in the state of Wyoming that has coronavirus. We are watching it. We actually have calls as of today starting weekly because now we have a potential shortage of PPE, which is our protective gear, the masks that we will talk about. There actually could be a shortage due to the fact that most of those are manufactured in China. So now we're starting to recognize kind of some of the other limitations of what will be happening. But with coronavirus, it's a pneumonia that broke out in Wuhan City. That's really critical for what we're finding. We need to watch anybody that has contact or has been to Wuhan. This started December 31st, but there's a lot of speculation out there of really how long this has been going on. Thousands of ill persons and unknown total number of deaths. Excuse me, I do not have the coronavirus. Related to the SARS virus that we've had years ago. It's very similar, all the characteristics are very similar to flu. Actually, more people died from the flu than we have concern about this at this time. Over 50,000 people have died from flu in a year's time. So that's actually something we need to be more worried about. The number one advice that we would provide and tell everybody is wash your hands. Avoid close contact with sick people. If you're sick, stay home. All of those kinds of things. Cover your nose and mouth. And basically cleaning as we would with anything else. But washing your hands is critical. But that's something that we constantly watch for. There is a potential vaccine. There's no funding that has come out for the coronavirus at this time. But a couple of years ago when Ebola kind of broke out again, there was funding that came out. There were procedures that we needed to do in all of that area. So coronavirus could be the next thing that we're keeping a track on. But just to keep it like in perspective is we're always watching everything that's going on and the impact that it could have on the community. So it's a real-time example. But just to clarify, we have no confirmed cases in the state, which is awesome. So going to the flu, which is actually something that we do all the time, as I said before, we provided 1,730 flu shots. That's how many we purchased, that's how many we put out. So it's very exciting. When I look at trying to figure out who accesses our services, our EHR or medical record, we don't often collect the 4 digits that follow the zip code. So it's very hard to kind of really get that figured out, but it's something that I'm trying desperately to figure out. But one thing that I was able to do is looking at the flu postcards that we sent out, just reminding all of our previous patients or our clients who we had come in before for flu shots. We sent out 2,700 flu vaccine reminder cards in September. Of that zip code analysis, 200 were county residents and 2,500 were city residents. So we ordered, as I said, the 1,730 flu shots and provided all of those. Those include the regular, the high dose, and the pediatric. We did do a city mass vaccination as well as a county. And we're also starting to do a lot of business clinics where we're going out into businesses. Instead of having their employees come to us, we'll go to them and providing vaccines. And we're looking to expand that as a possibility in the future to try to reach more people. This coming September, we will actually be doing a statewide pandemic flu exercise. I'm sure this is not the last time that you'll hear me talk about this, but it is really to ensure and be prepared for whatever it is that will happen, that we have the resources that we need. So I just wanted to talk about, basically I provided just a very bird's eye view of the vaccines that we provide, just a very small component of what we do at the health department. I would love for any one of you to come and visit us and spend time with us, just to show you the different things. But the importance of having and protecting our public's health. The generator will continue to ensure our security and safety of the vaccine, as well as a backup emergency operations center. I would like to now invite Commissioner Kaufman to kind of provide some information on her.
So thank you. I'll be quick. But you guys know that we're a partner in Casper and Trumbull County Public Health, and we always lead with Casper. And I was reading some documentation over the weekend, and it talked about when public health first started and the relationship with our 2 agencies started, the city of Casper funding was a lot higher than the county, and then in the last few years the county's come in a little bit higher. There's no formal arrangement on percentages or number of people served or anything like that. What I did want to share, we do view it as a partnership. You guys are tremendous partners in public health. Last Tuesday on consent, we did approve to purchase that generator because we know the need is acute. So you saw Hannah say the vaccines are worth $160,000. We don't have an option at this point. We can't really afford to lose them. So we would love your partnership. If you guys would consider a 50-50 split on that, it would mean a lot to us. But the generator has been ordered. We did get bids on that, and then ended up going with the company we felt could provide the best service and parts long term. So I would entertain any questions, but I wanted to stand here and say the commission has moved forward, and we understand there's an acute need.
Yeah, just
Councilman.
a couple of quick questions. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This is an additional generator to what we already have, is that correct?
A
Okay, and-
replacement.
Yeah, and it includes switchgear and all that kind of stuff.
I think the information's in your packet. I'm not the expert on the generator, but I don't know if you might know, but.
Yeah, so all of it, so if there would be any kind of surge, all of that equipment will be in place. Is that what you're referencing? The
Okay.
switchgear, yes, that has all been updated. It's just the generator is not able to carry the load that is required.
And then just a quick follow-up. This program, you know, you guys are obviously located in the center of the state. It looks to me like the states ought to be centered in the center of the state. Does the state have a similar warehouse?
So all of for the emergency preparedness component of that, is that what you're referencing? Or
Well, does the state have an inventory similar to what we have?
typically it's held within the communities themselves. Laramie did experience a inventory loss because of power outage, and it really then, it is a huge, tremendous hardship. It really falls back, especially if you do not have it insured, which many of us
Yeah.
have not in the past had it insured.
Well, it just seems to me that this ought to be a state project to put a backup inventory in the middle of the state where you got an airport.
Yep.
But that's another argument.
Yeah.
That's all right.
It's a great argument though. I like it.
Councilman Hubert.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I'm in favor of going in on this with you guys, but I do have a couple of questions. This generator that you're talking about, I'm presuming that is your building wired in such a way that there are priority circuits that are served by a generator and secondary ones that are not served? You know.
Yes, thank you for that question. We did, through all of this, have done a lot of investigation with county maintenance and electricians to go in and make sure those priority ones are on, like the freezers, for example, would be on that priority, and the other ones would go away. We have them marked with a red outlet versus your typical
Okay.
outlet, yes.
Okay, good.
And
Thank you.
continuing to refine that, because that is an older
Well, I know that
building.
building didn't start out, you know, it's had a variety of uses over the years.
Yes.
So I don't think it started out wired that way, but,
We're working to get that
yeah, okay, good.
better, yes. Mr. Mayor, may I add?
Does the old generator still work, or is it just too small?
Actually, the old generator does work and will be repurposed within the county and available for city. Basically, it would be something that would be put on a trailer that could be taken out to other entities if there was some kind of shortage or a need that they would need to have. That generator would then go and be able to be used elsewhere. So it would be repurposed so that, you know, a smaller, more immediate thing it could take care of. So just to go back to your question, Council, the inventory, so when I was explaining the emergency preparedness, where all of the vaccine would come to us within 48 hours, that will come straight from Cheyenne to Casper, and Douglas will have to come here. So there's the mechanism, once it comes here, then it feeds out to our more immediate people, but they're thinking that, you know, they'll drive on by Douglas and get it to us, and then we can get it back out, sorted out faster than by stopping in each little community on the way here.
Thank you.
Just to clarify.
Councilman Pacheco.
Yeah, I'm supportive of it. I think it's a no-brainer. So I just wanted to go on record to say I think we should move forward with it. If Carter will use his magic to move some numbers around.
Right.
You're like, thanks, Ray.
That's right, that's right. You are correct.
Councilman Cath.
That's right.
I didn't see, is this gonna be diesel or natural gas?
It will be diesel.
Okay.
Councilman Bates.
Again, I agree. We need to, I support this, liaison on it. And I don't know, I'm sure that you guys know, but Anna took the directorship over
7.5 months ago.
7.5 months ago. It's been great talking with her and hearing everything that they are doing at the health department. As far as that goes, I know I don't give, with the holidays came around, I didn't give much updates on it, but, yeah, I think this is, we really need to help support this.
Councilman Powell.
So Carter, have you decided where we would take this from, or where would the money come from?
Mr. Mayor, Councilman, basically what I would propose, and you'll see this come forward in a formal way via the budget amendment that we have coming up on the 25th, wherein 1% dollars, probably from 1 cent 15, would be, pulled into this project and made to have happen. Particularly if we can get some sort of indication that it's a 1 cent project, I think it would help a lot.
Any other questions?
You mind if I ask one thing? I think I may know the answer. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. But I really want to ask, just in case there might be a possibility, but this really seems like a really natural fit with respect to Homeland Security kinds of dollars. Given that we've already placed in a purchase, I'm not sure that we're in the running anymore. Is that a possibility by chance, Director?
Excellent question. When I took this to the commissioners, they really, I needed to talk with Rocky Mountain Power, Homeland Security. They gave me a list of people to find out what was going on. Homeland Security was contacted. It is a grant process that the grant is opening. I have it on a tag to remind myself. In the next 2 weeks, it does become open. I am more than happy to apply for that, and then they notify and release funds in October. So it was more of a timing issue that we couldn't accommodate it at that point. I'm thinking we've had 5 power outages, 5 close calls. So it was more of a timing thing, but more than happy to pursue that, and is on my to-do list.
That sounds great. Thank you.
We put it through the ringer too, don't worry. She's been through it.
I have no doubt.
Yeah.
But you've also had to replace one of the freezers because of the outages
Yes.
itself.
Yeah, it caused it too many surges, and minus 30 degrees in a freezer is, I mean, we could get the old one to minus 18, that's putting us too close. The refrigerators are old enough that they don't necessarily have the parts to replace, so we're working to try to figure out how to make that work within, we're not making an ask for that, we're hoping to be able to accommodate that, but yes, that is a situation that's coming forward. Our emergency preparedness did pay for half of the freezer, so we did make an ask to the state for that.
Councilman Bates.
More just a snide comment. You said you ran out of vaccines.
Flu vaccine.
Right, flu vaccine, but I'm assuming that if any council except for me wanted to come down and get vaccinated, you have some now.
Flu?
Yes.
Actually, we do not.
You don't?
You have to put your request in for flu vaccine in March for the following year.
Gotcha.
But there are places, we have a list in the community that does still have some. Walgreens and kind of some of more of those type entities continue to have the flu vaccine. We update the list, so we can provide that information at any time of who has got it available. But we have to project how many we're going to need for the next year, and then with the delay of getting the vaccine this year, it really kind of made it an interesting time.
That's right,
There was a little interesting with media, and I think it worked out into our favor. Drew a little extra attention to it, but flu vaccine is critical, so there are places in the community you can get it.
Any other questions? Okay, so we want to get a thumbs up on moving forward.
That'd be very helpful. Yes.
All right.
Very
Thank
good.
you so much
Thank
for
you.
your time.
All right, we'll move on to the de-annexation request. Mr. City Manager.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and members of the council. As we have very briefly discussed fairly recently, there is a portion of our community that a developer has approached the city to request a potential de-annexation exercise so that the subject area could, ostensibly be removed from the limits of the city and incorporated into the limits of the county, so to speak. The area in question is actually a piece of land that the city of Casper used to hold and had set aside for cemetery expansion type uses in the early planning stages for the city of Casper. And accordingly, at I think maybe 2 years ago, if I remember correctly, had turned that piece of property over to the private sector, hence the developer's ownership of it now. The basic request is to take it out of the limits of the city, move it into the county, but the reality is, in order to make such a exercise come to pass, there are a number of statutory obligations that both the city and the county need to follow for that to happen. As was indicated earlier as well, there is a city road that leads into the subject area that is in some disrepair, and the fact is that as that area starts to develop potentially in the next few years or whatever, the city would be on the hook to bring that road up to passable standards. And there's a number of ways that can happen, and we certainly have some information here tonight if it interests the council to review. There's a couple things that you should be aware of as you deliberate over this question. First of all, the city does not have the authority to foist land and or right-of-way obligations onto another governing body without their request and or agreement to do so. And so that to me is a real critical point that Wyoming statutes also lays out for you to be mindful of. The second thing is that an exercise of this nature does work against the efforts that the city has taken fairly recently, wherein, particularly for parts of our, the exterior boundaries of our community, if you will, that have utilities in place, the city has been working toward annexation efforts and outcomes and so on. So the reality is, this would be kind of a contrary exercise with regard to those recent activities and efforts. So with those two things in mind, I would suggest that council be aware of that and be mindful of that if indeed you had the proclivity to want to honor this request of de-annexation. And with that, Mr. Mayor, we certainly could answer any number of questions council would have or directives accordingly.
Councilman Hopkins.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. First of all, I don't think we are doing anything good for ourselves if we de-annex this property. And another thing that you alluded to slightly, I think, was for at least 25 years that I'm aware of, anybody that was outside the county and wanted to get on regional water, we said, you have to agree to come into the county. And they have signed agreements with that. We saw that just recently on Poplar. So we'd be just going backwards on what we've done for 25 years, and I just don't see any need to de-annex it.
Councilman Bates.
I agree with you, but if council wanted to de-annex it, would it cost the city any money to do so?
Mr. Mayor, Councilman Bates, my suggestion would be that for any of those costs that would be requisite to de-annex, I'm not even sure what that would be, it would be my suggestion that those would be foisted upon the petitioner so that there would be no costs to the citizens of Casper to make this happen.
Councilman Kathy.
Well, along those same lines, basically, we would lose property tax money, but we would gain sewer and water money because they would then be out of city utilities. Is that?
Mr. Mayor, Councilman Kathy, we actually put some pencil to paper, and I can give you a basic feel for what would potentially be lost pursuant to some level of development out there. Because as you know, right now there's zero development out there.
But I mean, I wasn't necessarily referring just to dollars. I was referring to the bigger scope of things. Those would be the two things that we would gain and lose. You know, if it's $1 or if it's $10, I wasn't really interested in. I was just mainly interested in the things that we would lose or gain.
The other thing that I would add to your list there is that indeed sales tax implications would be at stake pursuant to the amount of development, of course, as well as the amount of franchise fees that would be tied to the level of usage and development in that area as well.
Now, would we still provide fire to that, or would that wind up then falling under the purview of county fire?
If indeed the de-annexation took place, Mr. Mayor, Councilman, the services would be required to be provided by the county as it relates to fire. Now, certainly there are a number of ways in which city fire does help county fire and vice versa.
Oh,
so,
yeah.
but the primary,
agreement.
absolutely, but the primary responsibility would be county fires.
And I guess just to clarify on one thing, that we just have a water line running up there right now. There's no sewer line. Isn't that correct?
I think that's correct. I don't think we've ever had.
Water main. Water main.
Yeah, I don't think we've ever had need to run sewer through there. So at this point, there isn't.
Cemetery.
Yeah, that's right.
Well, I was under the impression that sewer had been put in at the same time water was in.
My understanding is it's only a water line running up there. It was meant to be a sewer, it was meant to be a cemetery, so there really was no need for a sewer line to run up there. It's just a water line. Is there a
There
sewer?
is sewer. Okay.
Okay. Councilman Powell.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. What was missing in the document is any reasoning why they wanted to do this. Did we have any idea? They've obviously gone to a lot of trouble. Why is it so important to them to be de-annexed? Do we know?
I'll be more than happy to take that one. We've had several conversations, and I have yet to have an actual reason given to us as to why they want it de-annexed. The answer that's been given to us is that if we choose not to, then we're just wasting the taxpayers' money that could go to other things like bonuses and insurance and whatever, which really it wouldn't go to that anyways.
You mean to rebuild the road, the money will cost.
The money, yeah, to rebuild the road itself. Now, it's my understanding we'd be responsible for maintaining that road because it is annexed into the city. I can only assume that if that is developed into a development itself, there's only one route of ingress and egress in there, so the second one's gonna have to be built, and that's gonna be paid by the developer, so I can imagine that's got something to do with it too. But we've never been given a real reason as to why it's every other reason but the actual reason as to why they want to do it. A couple of the things that they threw in that I want to personally bring up was they were talking about Wolf Creek Road having water and sewer run down it. And we looked into that today, and there is no water and sewer running down Wolf Creek. That is county. There are 3 people on that road that have tied into city services, but those have branched off of other areas within Wolf Creek. And they all have signed an annexation agreement, just like everybody on Poplar Street did, to where when the time comes and we decide to annex them in, they would be annexed in just like we did on Poplar. My personal opinion is if we de-annex this, we're flying right in the face of what we just did on Poplar Street. We're treating those residents completely different from this developer himself. Councilman Hebert.
Mr. Mayor, with reference to the condition of the street in there, road, whatever you want to call it, if we were to deny their request to de-annex them, is there anything that would say that, well, okay, we have to forthwith go in and redo that street? Or would that just be a project that would fall within the general priorities set throughout the city?
Mr. Mayor, Councilman, it would fall within the general sort of priorities with respect to the other projects that we have in the queue.
And I guess just lost my train of thought. Anybody else have a question?
And even if
Councilman
we
Paul.
did agree, the county would still have to agree. And it's my understanding that the county has a longstanding policy of not wanting to have essentially subdivisions under their control, which would, this would eventually become, it looks like, because they have some development plans that they haven't specified, so. I don't see what value it would have for us to agree if the county's not going to accept it.
And that was my follow-up comment, is to clarify that the county, in fact, on this does not agree with de-annexing.
Well, that's kind of the end of the discussion, it seems to me.
Councilman Bates.
And it's surrounded by, if I remember the map correctly, it's city and then surrounded strictly by state, not even county. Property, right?
There is some county property, but the state, I think, is on the east side of the property, and then to the south and the west is
No, that's
county.
no property.
Yeah, it's
Oh,
no
okay.
property.
Okay.
Vice Mayor Lutz.
I don't need to sit here and repeat what everyone said, but we all remember pretty much every individual involved in the South Poplar coming in and saying, I would really rather not be annexed into the city, yet we went ahead with it because we had a pre-standing agreement. I think it's absolutely out of place to say, okay, we're gonna force you all to come to the city, but this guy asked, so we'll let him go out. So I just don't think there's any justification in de-annexation.
And Mr. Mayor, if I may, I agree, and if they had given us some compelling reason or
Yes.
some compelling advantage that they would have as a result of this, I would be certainly willing to listen to that, but without even giving us a reason, I see no reason to go forward with that.
But the point is, we still have to have the county permission to give it back to them, and they're not gonna give it.
Correct.
They've already said that.
Correct.
Yeah.
And just one last comment, and I don't know if you hit on it or not, but Vice Mayor Lutzen had received information from this person also, that basically if it was voted down to be de-annexed, the next step is you're gonna hear how we're taking money away by putting it back into the road. That's money that could be well spent elsewhere. So just understand that's coming forward next, but
It's not surprising.
it just doesn't make sense.
I would
for us
argue
to
we
do
wouldn't
this.
do the road unless they do the development, because we're not gonna tear it up and put new water lines and stub in.
Right.
That's true.
All right, so as far as moving forward on the de-annexation. Okay, we'll move on to the municipal golf course clubhouse and concessions. Mr. City Manager.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Mayor, members of the council, as you are aware, not too long ago, in fact, within the last few weeks even, the council passed a motion to revoke an agreement with the concessionaire at the 19th hole clubhouse there at the golf course. And since that time, we have been working to find another partner in that facility so that indeed concessions could continue to be provided for our customers and golfers and their family members and so on as they come to access services at that course. As a part of that process, we have been able to understand and learn that indeed Johnson Restaurant Group has interest in participating out there at that facility as our concessionaire partner. And as a matter of fact, we're the only applicants, if you will, that submitted a proposal to provide those services out there. Now, the caveat with regard to that potential partnership is that indeed they believe that the layout of the restaurant facility there at the clubhouse is inadequate. and as a matter of fact, would propose some alterations and changes that would make a restaurant service out there much more feasible and have the potential to serve customers more appropriately and better. Given that we have that proposal in hand, as well as an understanding as to what it takes to bring some of those services that could be rendered out there in a more appropriate manner, we would like to propose that indeed this is something we want to consider, even though it would require some investment in the building in order for it to serve more functionally and practically as it relates to a restaurant service. The challenge is that indeed we don't believe that that building has a much longer useful life associated with it. And as a matter of fact, many of you have seen some of the deficiencies that we're working with as it relates to that building. My suggestion would be that this facility doesn't have 10 more years with us, particularly if we want to have it be a full service facility that we attempt to try to make it now. I would also say that I can't see us recommending bringing a proposal forward to you within the next 5 years of trying to replace that building or significantly modify that building to add years to its useful life. So the changes that we're suggesting very well could be in the $100,000 neighborhood, and I will tell you that that is not the changes that we need for that building to have a 20 or 30 year useful life added to it. However, I do think for that building to be functional and to provide the services that we have tried to provide out of that building for the last number of years, I think you're going to have to consider very seriously this proposal and the cost implications that come with it in order for it to serve in a capacity that we think will give us a better shot at seeing a stronger revenue possibility and potential in the short term that it has left in its life. So with that recommendation kind of up front, that indeed we do think that this is a nice opportunity to consider. I wanted Mr. Cortez to kind of walk you through what some of those changes are and what some of those modifications are going to be, so that indeed you have a full understanding of what that could include as a part of this proposal.
Mr. Mayor, Council, thanks for giving me a few words. In your memo, I have outlined kind of the main things at the time that we were looking at. This is something that we worked with John Johnson on, kind of formulating what that plan looks like and what he thinks he needs for a successful operation. The impetus, the main thing was probably around the kitchen, meaning, you know, to put out quality food in a significant amount of volume, that the kitchen is just grossly inadequate. So if you refer to your memo and you look at kind of some of the things that we're looking at, a lot of those changes revolve around that, meaning we need to move a door so we could, you know, put in a bigger hood that could house more appliances and be more efficient for the restaurant folks to put out the food that they need to. We had a lot of other superficial type things, you know, like new flooring, new paint, those types of items throughout the structure, the upstairs. But I think that Carter hit the nail on the head when he said, how much investment do you put into it? And that's the thing we've been kind of struggling with, and that's why I appreciate those of you that could join me over the past week out there, and any of you that couldn't make it, if you want to go out there and check it out, just shoot me a call or an email or something, we'll go out and take a look at it. I do have a few photos that I can put up here on the screen that kind of show you some of the issues that we have. The good thing is that I had found a structural engineer out there today. He's going to provide a written report to me later, but I got a chance to visit with him. Verbally, what I can tell you is we're not in some alarmist type mode where the building's gonna come down on us at any given moment. It is not that way. It was built to last, was built in 1980. It's a masonry building, and you'll see cracks like this throughout the structure. And you know, just one or two of these is not really a big deal, but what stuck out to me in visiting with that engineer is that the reason we're seeing this cracking is probably not something that's recent. It's probably been there for quite some time. But his comment is that a lot of the walls probably don't have the mortar and rebar within the walls that would kind of strengthen and keep it from doing that. And that's what you'd get in today's standards for buildings. One of the more the doors don't fit. That's why I got this picture in here. But for those of you that got a chance to get up there, what they've done is to get the doors to shut, they've cut pieces of the doors off so that they actually will shut. And then there's other doors that have, you know, a 2-inch gap above them where it shuts real easy, but they had to shut down they had to shave down the bottom of the door to get it that way. And so, you know, this wall right here it's kind of cattywampus. It's hard to catch in the photo, but you can kind of see towards the back of the room there. You can see how it's kind of leaning in and it's kind of twisting in a way. The good thing is the engineer looked at that and he said, hey, I don't see any horizontal cracking, so it's not like the wall is necessarily failing. It's just, you know, kind of, it's showing its age, for lack of better terms. I mean, we've had the building for over 40 years, so, you know, that's kind of where I think that background comes into play. To get all the stuff done that the group is requesting, that's kind of the end of the pictures. Like I said, if you want to see more of that, let me know. It's about $125,000 is what we've got for initial quotes. You know, so like for instance, like flooring would run you, $27,000. To do the hood and the kitchen equipment, some of that stuff would run you, say, another $30,000. You kind of add it all up, and that's what you end up with, is about an aggregate of $125,000. We do have a special reserve fund that's for the golf course. If you recall, the only facility I have in Parks and Rec that makes money is golf. And so they built up that reserve over years. We've set a policy of where it caps out at $300,000, and then anything that spills over that goes into the general fund to help, with some other facilities that I have that don't make money that are subsidized. So what we're looking for is your authorization to access that reserve account for the purposes of doing some refurbishment on the structure to basically dress it up and get it to where it's functioning good for the restaurant portion. As Carter said, it is not the silver bullet for this building. It's more of just get some stuff painted, get some new flooring in there, work the kitchen a little bit, and get it in a spot where it's better suited for success until we decide at a later date what we need to do for the longer term. With that, I'll take any questions.
Tim, to add on to that, you said John Johnson actually is going to supply the hood for the kitchen, correct?
Correct. I just talked to him today. We're still going to look at it on Friday to revisit if we do in fact need a new hood. But he has a hood that he's taken out of a restaurant up in Rapid City that he said we could have so long as we were willing to foot the bill for the removal of the existing one and the installation of his larger hood that would be about 4 feet longer. So thank you.
Sounds like kind of a remodel light.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. That's right.
I'm game.
Anybody got any questions?
I kind of do. On the average, about how much, and I understand that the concessionaire that's been in there has not been an optimal situation, but how much has the city brought in over the years in income to the city off of the restaurant bar operation up there? Do we know that?
Councilman, I couldn't tell you the exact number offhand. I could just tell you it's a very low number. I'm sorry to say, because when I first took this job, the concessionaire prior to me coming in had left in the middle of the season, leaving no services up there. So that means we probably didn't get anything, and if it did, you're talking less than $1,000. The next year where I took it over, where we got in the 2-year agreement with the person that was terminated with, that year we probably made about $4,000, and then this last year was probably about the same. However, we have yet to get that lease payment. So in actual collected dollars, a pretty low amount over the past 3 years, for sure.
And Mr. Mayor, just to make a general comment, I continue to be troubled by these places where the city's expected to pay all the maintenance and expense and upgrades and all of that stuff, and then we farm it out to some private enterprise to potentially make profits on it. I'm bothered by that, not only at the golf course, but at Hogan, at the event center, everywhere else. The city seems to have a habit of doing that, and I'm troubled by that. But at this point, you know, this is probably the best bad situation.
Well, on that point, do we know approximately what the city, is it a percentage of sales that we retain?
So as a matter of fact, the previous contract is the same as this contract. We're looking at 3% of gross sales. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. Councilman Hoffman.
As I recall, within the last couple of years, we had looked at all of our accounts like this. And the golf course was actually one, well, they don't recover any of the capital costs. They essentially break even on operating costs every year. And that's our flagship right now for what we're trying to do. So I don't mind putting a little more capital into it. So.
Vice Mayor Lutz.
No, I just say, I did get the pleasure of going and looking at the space, and I think anytime that we have the opportunity to partner with someone who is very well respected in the community in this particular industry. And so I think we have kind of a fresh start in this sense of, yes, we have to put a little bit of money into bringing up the space, but I mean, if you've seen the space, both Ken and I were talking about, it's got these huge, beautiful exposed beams. I mean, it does have potential. I mean, with just a little bit of basically fluff stuff like paint and floors, it'll look really nice, and it'll be a really nice facility, and we have somebody coming in who wants it to succeed. So this is a win-win, in my opinion.
Councilman Bates.
Rolling through everything through my head regarding it, from the sounds of it, from the pro person, we lost money on that. And then the person that was running the dining hall, we lost money there. And we're looking at fixing that, obviously. So we will be taking money in, and then as, if I'm remembering correctly, Mr. Tim said that it's one entity or place that actually makes money or breaks even or whatever. So I guess I asked this council, and who continues, that we have a place that makes money and could potentially make even more money, since we saw that we were losing money in that other areas. And I agree with putting the money into it, but I think we seriously need to look at a new building for it much sooner than later, because the new building is just, I think, overall gonna bring us in that much more money. So I just hope council will really consider that here in the really, you said possibly not within the next 5 years. I'd like to see it if it's possible in the next 5 years, because we have, Hogadon wasn't making us money, we put money into it, and we're still not getting what we think. Same thing with the event center, look at a new ice thing possibly for the rec center, it's still there, but we have a place that makes money, but yet we're not gonna put in a good amount of trust money into it that will make us money. I'm kind of struggling with the whole idea of not building a new one, so I just hope council will really think that through sooner than 5 years. Just my thought, but I support it.
Councilman Bell.
I would certainly support putting it as a number one project. What do you call it, priority one project for the next 1 cent cycle, assuming it passes in 2022. That to me would be the right way to go about this, because first we have to build a police station and a fire station, and those are big ticket items. So my opinion is, I think every facility that the city owns reflects on the city, and we should try to have all of our facilities be as inviting and as, and look nice if we can. if this building is structurally sound, I think this is a relatively small amount of money, if that's what it takes to recruit a good vendor and have it be, have the kitchen be operational and meet health department standards. Especially since the money came from the golfers.
Councilman Biggs.
And that's what I wanted to point out too, was as Vice Mayor Lutz mentioned when we were there, that this isn't, we're not asking the taxpayers to pay this, the money's already there for something like this. And so we're not asking for additional money, we're just saying, you're just asking, can we use this money that we have additional for this? So I guess I just kinda want that on record, that it's not costing the taxpayers any money if council approves it.
All right, the only quick comment that I'd make on it is I welcome the John Johnson group coming in there. If anybody can make it happen, they can. Not saying that others can't, but I think we truly know whether or not that restaurant's gonna, you know, actually make some money. I personally think people are gonna go there that aren't even golfers, they're gonna go there to eat. But at the same time, looking at the building, I think we had this conversation this week that if they can't make that restaurant go, then when you go to redo the clubhouse later on, maybe we talk about not even having a restaurant up there. If the people that run restaurants can't make a go of it, then when we go to talk about doing a new clubhouse, maybe that just gets axed out of there. And I don't want that to happen, but I mean, you just got to look at the reality behind it. So, but I'm all for putting this money in now, and especially the fact that the building can last a while. Let's give it a shot and see what this does for us. I think there's going to be some good changes up there this year. So, very good. So we need a thumbs up.
That'd be great, yeah.
Okay.
Awesome, thank you so much.
You. Okay, we'll move on to agenda review. Excuse me. We're looking at the 18th thing on the 18th. Stand.
Let's see. Mr. Mayor, members of the council, the 18th is your big liquor license renewal meeting. That will be the time where you deliberate over the data that you've been given, hear reports from some of the vendors, and determine whether or not the renewals take place.
Can I add some of that? I don't know if I said it tonight when we're talking about liquor license, but during the next meeting, those that did not get their applications in on time, we did ask them to come here during the next council meeting so that we could just at least have that open discussion as to why some of these are 2 months late in coming in, and just kind of give them a heads up as the direction that, it's not set in stone where we're headed, but the direction that we talked about heading with that, so.
It will be different.
Yeah.
Mr. Mayor, the other thing that we've talked about as well along the lines of very similar to what we just discussed on the golf course side, we do have the parking lot going in up at Hoganon pending favorable approval of the agreement with JTL to make that project happen. So long awaited, needed improvement. Thank you for being willing to consider it. And then the other thing that I would bring to your attention, we are asking for a rejection of bids as it relates to walk-in coolers and freezers up at the event center. The only reason we're asking for those bids to be rejected is so that we can have the opportunity to try again, because we do think we have had the equipment, the wrong equipment, I guess you'd say, spec'd out in that project. Is that fair to say, Tim?
Yeah, I think what it was we had an on-site meeting for the contractors, and they looked at it, and they just missed that the flooring was different than what they had in their mind, and they kind of all missed it. And of course, we're not in that business, so we didn't know. So, in a nutshell, you're correct.
So we do plan to continue with that project. We're just going to need another run at it, basically, is where we're at with that. I have asked the chief to come and do a sole source discussion with you pertaining to their GTAC computers, and I think covering that in the pre-meeting would be very adequate. And that's it.
How much of the Hogan lot are we gonna pay?
We're doing the requisite amount for parking spaces and serving, kind of the wedding crowd, if you will, during the
Third
summer.
of it or so?
What do you think, Tim? Is it about a third, or?
I would actually say it's a little bit more than that. To me, it looked probably closer to 80% of it.
Oh, really?
Paid. There was a couple portions that were missing that like led to the back of the ski patrol hut, and then another patch that was gonna go up to the doors for the catering folks. We just didn't have the budget to fit it in, but it actually covered more than what we thought. And as to Carter's point, we will have more than the requisite amount that we should have for that facility.
And we'll get it done this summer then?
We hope to get it done this construction season, that's right. Yeah, pretty excited about that.
Will that connect into the road itself then, coming in there, or will it still be pavement to dirt to pavement?
It looks like it is gonna be some dirt in there still along the roadway.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Is this, we got kind of in mind that this is gonna be another venue outside to put up tents and help, maybe with something not bear trap related, but non-bear trap related?
Mr. Mayor, Councilman, are you talking about in the parking lot then?
Yeah.
Like kind of having, I do think it opens the door for that. And that falls right in line with council goals, is kind of realizing some more of that off-season type
Yeah.
things that we can do. Spectra's already kind of in those discussions with people that would like to maybe bring like kind of like a little convention to the venue, and then have things out in the parking lot that, people could have booths
Good.
and stuff. And so that is in the top.
Do your marketing, man.
Councilman Bell.
Could you tell us about the PUD? Maybe I'm just not remembering. The Centennial Hills PUD guidelines, and where's that again?
Mr. Mayor, Councilman Powell, that would be, it would be the open area west of the Centennial Hills. What's the name of that neighborhood development there that, remember? Do you remember?
It's in the Centennial Hills itself, right?
Yeah, it's west
corner
of Centennial Hills, but the name of that one development that's been problematic with the skinny streets and so forth. Boots and, I can't remember the name of the neighborhood. Anyway, west of that area, certainly we don't expect the same PUD elements that we saw on the east development with the skinnier streets that are causing us the parking issues right now. And so, exciting development.
It's like around 15th there? or-
Well, no, it's more or less gonna be Country Club and Wyoming Boulevard.
Oh, a
that
little
corner,
bit
Going to the
south,
north and
yes.
east of there.
Okay.
Right, that first phase is coming on initially. Yeah, Country Club and Wyoming Boulevard, that's right.
And tell us about the Indian Paintbrush Chemical Feed Facility. That's a new one for me too.
Okay, I can. That one is, let me find it real quick.
It's on
The back page?
Yeah, it's the third one, well,
Second.
second one down.
Oh, okay. That ferrous chloride is the chemical additive that we put into the lines that deal with that buildup of that hydrogen sulfide issue that we're having on that interceptor line.
Okay.
I'm hopeful that with the replacement of that line, we have less purchases of this, particularly for that part of our system. So that really is all it is. It beats down the hydrogen chloride, or excuse me, the hydrogen sulfide, and helps to preserve slow down the corrosion process, if you will.
Is there a dollar amount attached to it?
It's about a $75,000 purchase. Lasts us through the rest of the fiscal year, probably.
In case we get asked.
There's two more. Let's go.
Yes, that's right. Yes.
Oh, there we go, yeah. This one is
It is, yeah. the mayor's asking the question about the third entry on the front page of the 18th. The, excuse me a second. Is that where I'm at? Yeah, Greenway Park.
Second on the Greenway Park.
Yeah, that's over there by the, what they call the preserve area, if you will, off of 21st. They're expanding that development into this, this addition, if you will, called the Greenway Park 3.
That's Eads? Is it?
No, that's at, the preserve apartment buildings there. They're wanting to expand, I believe, to the east and
Okay.
and further north.
That's what I understood.
I think Kensington, the one below that, Kensington Heights.
Kensington, I'm gonna have to ask another question or two about that one.
Oh, and you've got Gritter coming for the bright spots. Gritter Murray, and an acts of kindness, which is a really cool program.
Okay, anything on the work session for the 25th?
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, I'm real excited to hear about the IMS pavement management report. Hopefully you will share that excitement as well. This is a really interesting survey that we did of the pavement conditions throughout the community with this really interesting vehicle that had sonar equipment and so on. Very, very fascinating. Along those, not along those lines, but following that discussion, the school district would like to petition us for the vacation of 8th Street between David and Center, and we thought that would be a nice opportunity also to talk about the cutouts that they would like to see in subdivision developments that Councilman Bates brought up at one point in the past. And so we'll try to, I was going to say kill two birds with one stone. That's not a great saying, but hopefully accomplish two things with that particular discussion. The amendment is going to be a big item for us. It'll help us kind of get this current budget into a closing status and get us ready for the next budget discussion, which I'm sure if you're like me, it's kind of hard to believe that we're already moving into fiscal year 21. Goodstein lease, we're hoping will be wrapped up and ready to bring to you for consideration and discussion. And that should do us for the 25th.
Anybody have anything they want to add to suggested items, or are we good?
I have one. It's a touchy subject, so everybody bear with me on this. But after the advisory council for the LGBTQ, it was asked if I received a lot of emails regarding it all, for and against, but something that was asked is, since it was said that we, council, went to the LGBT and asked them if they wanted to create that they didn't come to us. And that same thing with disability, that we went to them, they didn't necessarily come to us. That if the city would consider, what was it? Sorry, I didn't print it out. If the city would consider checking on other minority groups and asking them if there are any others out there that would, that the city would ask if they want to create an advisory board. So I don't know if we want to discuss, put that on an agenda to discuss it or what, but that was just asked, and I said, I'll ask council that if there are other minority groups that city knows of that feels they should have advisory or that they're not listened to, if city would give us a list of potential people, groups, whatever you want to call it, and we can discuss that. So I put it out there.
Chief, if I may, I know in the past we've, you know, with the whole Black Lives Matter movement, I know that some departments have reached out to African American communities to establish a relationship. I know we had done that in the past. I don't know if you were aware of that. Have we made any recent contacts to try to make sure there's a conduit of information so that people feel like they have a voice and that they're being treated fairly, or is that just not a priority at this point?
So, Mayor, if I may, Council, you know, when I first got here, I reached out to as many communities as I could so that I could create those conduits of information. Reverend Pierce, for example, comes to mind. There's a period of time when he was a little under the weather. So I believe that we have conduits of information, and we're constantly doing outreach and getting feedback. I don't have any formal processes in right now, but you know, that is something I have done in the past.
I know that Jimmy Simmons was involved in some of that communication. Not that there were, you know, widespread grievances or people feeling that they were, you know, being mistreated, but I know that there was some communication lines in place to make sure people had a sense that they had a way to communicate with the chief if they did feel like they were mistreated.
I guess I'll ask you, Councilman Bates, is this a person that came forward that is from a community that feels they're not being listened to, or is this another person that is, for lack of better terms, looking at it as though the LGBTQ community has an advisory board, and so now they want to come in and create another board in there? I mean, is there a...
Two. First one, both. One was actually a women's right advisory group that they brought up how the parade was about women's rights, and last year's parade was really about women's rights, and so that's one of them. But then the other one was just wanting blanket asks if there's other community aspects of minorities in the community that should be looked at. So, like I said, I'm relaying what was asked to council. I said I would. That's as far as it, asking more of the city to look into a list of possibly minority groups that feel neglected that you could bring back to us and see if they actually want an advisory or something. So, but the one mentioned women's rights advisory group type thing.
Okay, Councilman Pacheco first.
So I guess my question would be to Carter is, I think looking at it and saying, okay, we are trying to identify at-risk groups or groups that are minority, I'm trying to be careful, groups that feel like they're on the fringes and they need support, or they're looking to have a voice in that sense. So I think looking at that type of stuff and to being able to say we're being objective to that and being open to, you know, those conversations, because I would say that to answer that question, we're having a dialogue already with the LGBTQ community, and they've already been in a dialogue with us for the last 2 or 3 years, having a dialogue with us, and to have those conversations. And so I guess my question would be, is this something that the city would go look and say, okay, let's identify other minority groups or at-risk groups in the community that don't have a voice, I guess.
Mr. Mayor, Councilman Pacheco, certainly Councilman Bates, in kind of thinking through a response to the question at hand here, Council is well aware that we have had a member of the African American community here in Casper come forward and identify some opportunity areas, if you will, with respect to engaging that portion of our community more frequently. Mayor Friel, you mentioned an interaction that you had experienced as well in that regard. Another sort of element of the community that has gotten a lot of awareness, but probably could use more. And I hear about these kinds of discussions a lot as well. It seems like it's on the front of the community's mind, and that's with respect to areas relating to those who suffer from suicide ideation and the significant portions of our community that might struggle with those kinds of challenges in their life. It's not necessarily a minority community, if you will, but definitely a part of our community that seeks help frequently, and might even contend that resources aren't adequate in our community to provide help with. So those two things come to mind for me as I sit and think about this.
Councilman Huber first.
Mr. Mayor, and I know that neither Councilman Bates or Pacheco or the city manager intend to in any manner be, I don't like to use the word offensive or anything, but I'm really troubled by referring to any of these kind of advisory things as representing, quote, minorities. I think that it would be much more appropriate if we address anything like this in terms of the context of, and I don't want to say special interest groups, but even interest groups, because the minute that we start saying minorities, that sets up an us versus them posture in a lot of people's minds. And that might sound like I'm just quibbling over semantics, but I think that's a very important semantic, because I got news for you. It's not us versus them, it's us. It's all about all of us, the whole community. And you know, what I would kind of suggest, and I don't know if it's better to do this right now or if it's better to sort of let the dust settle down a little bit. I really don't have the answer to that. But to say that, you know, are there any other interest groups out there that feel that their needs need to, you know, would be beneficially addressed by having some kind of an advisory commission or committee or whatever we want to call it, because I really mean what I was saying in there on the council floor when I was saying that I want everybody to feel like it's you know, they have an open avenue to come in and talk to the city, because there might very well be some things about mental illness that the city council could be doing. There might be some things about a lot of these different things that we could be doing that we're just simply not aware of, and that people are hesitant to step up in front of that podium and start talking about. But I really, really would suggest that we not use terms like minority groups, because I don't think that accurately conveys the message. You know, interest groups, maybe area of concern groups, something like that. And I don't think that's just quibbling over meaningless semantics.
Councilman Hopkins.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, I share some of the concerns. I hesitate to say that we are trying to vote or trying to act on what's trending on social media. That's not constructive to our city, typically not. And besides that, very little of the stuff is true when it's negative. So I think what I try and do when I get somebody on the phone and has a specific complaint, I say, you know, council will listen every week, and if you've got regarding a specific issue, please come and talk to us. And some of the folks really do show up. The young lady that started us down with the people that need some help mentally and you know, are not fully functioning in society. That originally started out, and I'm sure she talked to a number of you folks, and she did come to council. She made a very nice presentation to us. And we took that under advisement, and then we reached out. So I think that's the opportunity we have. But to get to a point where you want to treat special interest groups different, especially when they're, quote, trending on social media, I think that's a mistake. We are elected as representative kind of government. We are not a democracy. We are a republic. And I think we need to kind of maintain those guidelines. It's worked pretty good for 200 and some years.
Councilman Pacheco.
To my right honorable friend, I'm okay with the word minority because I'm a minority. I'm a smaller group of the Hispanic group that is a smaller population. And I understand what you're trying to say, but there are minorities. There are minority groups. The LGBTQ, there's only 2-3% in the LGBTQ community. That's a minority. As a Hispanic, there's only maybe close to 5 or 6% in Wyoming that are Hispanic. We're a minority. But we are still one people. We're still a human race. But I'm part of that, and I identify myself as a minority, as a Hispanic, and I'm proud of that. And I'm proud of my minority status in this country, and my parents taught me that. So I just wanted to say that.
So we put this on a work session later down the road, and I somewhat agree. You know, I think that we get a couple knee-jerk reactions that take place when we make a vote like we did last week, and I think that ball gets rolling, and I'd rather that we give it just a little bit of time, bring it on a work session issue, and then we can discuss how it would be incorporated, what it would be called, or if we even need to go that route. Okay. Anything else on the agenda review? Okay. On to legislative review.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, the legislative session is underway, as you well know, and we have had what I consider fairly favorable action so far in the introduction stage of the legislative process. We do have assigned to committee a couple real important topics that we've been following as it relates to surface water diversion as well as municipal options for taxation. Those have been assigned to committee, and we plan to be there as much as we can to try to help the conversation. But certainly my position on those kinds of things coming forward is that it's a welcome opportunity to have some dialogue, where in reality in a budget session like this, those opportunities could have been very easily cast aside and postponed or permanently delayed, if you will. The other piece of legislation, however, that did make it also through introduction that I'm not as excited about is with regard to the health insurance moratorium legislation. That also made it out of introduction, and we will certainly be keeping our eye on that piece of legislation as well.
If I may add, Mr. Mayor, I did receive a text from Matt Hall, the mayor of Cody, and he informed me that the municipal option tax did get removed from the consent agenda. And so it's due to come up for introduction and needs support. And I think we have good support within our delegation, as far as I know, with maybe one exception. But never hurts to.
Last day is for introductions Friday, right?
I don't know that.
I think this week is certainly the last.
Friday is the,
So contacts with our legislators are always helpful.
Councilman Lee.
No, it's just.
So, Mr. Mayor, it sounds like the most recent status on that very email is that it did come out of consent and is assigned to, is it revenue or? Revenue. So we're excited about that municipal option coming forward. Glad to see it at least continue in dialogue stage. We all know that dialogue may be as far as we get, but at least we have that opportunity.
Let me emphasize that this is a compromise group that both WAM and WCCA are behind, and that's a sea change for that to happen. So some of these other arguments against it now hopefully become more of a minority position.
Do we know if Cheyenne gave the same kind of hint that we did, that we'd be willing to share a little bit? Did they come up to that level? Or do we know?
Mr. Mayor, Councilman, there is a sharing provision as it relates to direct distribution, if I'm following you correctly, and it does include the larger cities like Casper and Cheyenne being required to share portions of the funding that they have typically gotten to smaller towns throughout the state.
We told the legislators we'd be more than willing to share.
We told the legislators that we would be willing to share, and that indeed we hope that willingness can be remembered for things like the discussion related to municipal option taxation and those kinds of things. So hopefully it's a give and take.
Yep.
And we will keep our eye on that possibility.
Okay, anything else?
No, sir.
With you? Okay.
When was the 26th to the 28th? February.
All right, Councilor on the table, Councilman Hopkins.
I don't have anything tonight, thank you.
Councilman Hubert.
Nothing, thank you.
Councilman Pacheco.
Nothing.
Councilman Bates. Councilman All right, it comes back to me. Well, I'll tell you, last Saturday I was able to do a proclamation for Floyd and Pam Dunn. They ran the dog sled races for 25
Canines
years.
for charity.
Yeah, Canines for Charity. And I did a proclamation for them. That was, of course, Pam just passed away back in July of last year, and Floyd didn't know we were doing the proclamation. That was a very moving proclamation. And then last Friday night, I went and did I attended the Tim Tebow Night to Shine. First time I've ever been to that. And if anybody's ever had the or if you have the opportunity to go to that, I would definitely tell you to do it. That is for people with disabilities. It's a prom night for them. And Mike Fackler and his group over at Highland Park Church pulled out all the stops. They had a paparazzi tunnel that people were cheering on one end, and it was the biggest smiles on everybody's face to come out there. And they had a limo out front. They put him in a limo and drive around the parking lot, and they treated him like king. I'll tell you, it's probably one of the most moving things I've been to in a very long time, and very well worth going. I intended to be there to give my speech and carry on with my Friday night, and I did right there at the church the rest of the night. So it was very good time. I would suggest that if next year, if you feel compelled to do so, I would attend. So other than that, that's all I got. I would just note there, I noticed there's a note at the bottom of these sheets about cell phones, just to make sure they're silent. So if we could make sure that we turn those off, then we'll be good. Anything else?
No, sir. Thank you.
All right.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.
Good week.
Thanks, everyone.
I know you have a family to get to. As always, could you look at some?
Were you a little bit